Harriette Van Spall, Associate Professor of Medicine, cardiologist, and scientist at McMaster University, and I'm honored to have with me today Dr. Cindy Grines, Chief Scientific Officer of the Northside Hospital Cardiovascular Institute and the President of the Society of Angiography and Interventions. Welcome, Dr. Grines.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
We are going to talk about some of the gender-related inequities in cardiology, interventional cardiology, and clinical trial leadership today. I have to admit, you are a huge source of inspiration to men and women in cardiology, including myself. But as a pioneer who has broken barriers, you are particularly inspirational to women. In a 2017 interview with Dr. Ullman, you said, you learn how to be tough when you talked about managing the competing demands of pregnancies and your clinical work as an interventional cardiologist, and of course, your research leadership as a clinical trialist. Tell us how you navigated some of these barriers and what some of the facilitators were for your success.
Gosh, there were so many barriers. It's hard to even start. Obviously, when you're going through training, there are barriers to even get a cardiology fellowship and to become an interventionalist. It's interesting. I thought patients would be a barrier, but the patients seemed to be fine. They had no problem being with a female physician, and actually studies have shown they prefer female physicians. But it was more the surrounding people that were the issue. And I was fortunate in that I was at the University of Michigan doing my cardiology training, and I was surrounded by lots of other people who were doing high quality research. I went into my fellowship thinking that I wanted to be an echocardiographer, and I came out being an interventional cardiologist. And in large part, that was because I was there during the reperfusion era when it was first taking off. We were doing a lot of thrombolytic trials where we required angiograms to determine coronary patency. And so I really got into the cath lab work and doing angioplasty, and that was really the focus of my investigation for the next couple of decades.
Right. So the barriers were more in the culture and some of the faculty members around you. How did you overcome some of these barriers?
Well, I think at the time, we didn't have this Me Too movement, and, we just if people did inappropriate or said inappropriate things, we just kind of brushed them off because that's the way it was. And so I didn't let it bother me, to be honest. And I never really pulled the woman card and complained about things. But, times have changed now. But I found there weren't many women around to be your mentors. So I had mostly male mentors, and they were very helpful. I think if you're just inquisitive and hardworking and you don't waste their time and you actually start writing abstracts and papers, then they like you a lot. And that was really helpful to have those male mentors.
Right. We have an upcoming co-publication together in JAC on a roadmap to increase gender equality in clinical trial leadership. Tell us about how we might go about closing the gender gaps that you have alluded to in clinical trial leadership. There are particular challenges in research leadership that may be even more profound than in clinical cardiology. Tell us about those and how we might overcome them.
Well, it is very difficult to become a cardiovascular trial leader, as you are well aware. And I was lucky in that I was at the beginning of percutaneous interventions for STEMI. And I really made a name for myself because nobody else was doing that. So I think niche research has actually been very, very helpful. With regard to trying to get grants, I think that there's probably not a lot of discrimination in that area per se. It really would be nice actually if they could block out your name, because there might be these subconscious biases. But with regard to, I see a big difference though when it comes to industry sponsored funding, at least in interventional cardiology. In large part, it's related to, again, the good old boy network and the amount of volume that you do in the cath lab. So even though it's supposed to be separated, that's not how it works. So if you're chosen to be an investigative site, it's because you do a high volume of procedures and you use that particular vendor's equipment. And the same holds true for who they select to be principal investigators for many of their trials. Now, the FDA has actually stated that they want more um, ethnic and women and diversity in the trial participation with regard to both patients as well as site PIs at least. And there's a strong thought that if you are a woman, you're going to be more likely to enroll female patients because you can understand them better and talk to them better. And so we are working very closely with the FDA on trying to increase the participation of women investigators. But is it a mandate? Absolutely not. We have to work with industry.
Right. My team has a couple of papers, one in the European Journal of Heart Failure that showed the association, the independent association between women clinical trialists and recruitment of women participants. And another one showing the same association with recruitment of ethnically diverse populations. So some benefits, at least in terms of associations of a diverse research leadership force. We certainly see diversity in the frontline aspects of research recruitment, but it doesn't necessarily translate to research leadership yet. And as you point out, there are some particular challenges in industry sponsored trials where the path to clinical trial leadership is not clear and where the calls for research leadership are not open. So certainly some barriers to navigate in that area. What are your priorities as the president of your association?
Well, as you already mentioned, there is a lot of problem with a lack of mentorship and exposure of women. There aren't as many women at the podium. There aren't as many women who are chairing sessions. There aren't as many women who are, first author on publications. And so um, throughout SCAI for actually over a decade now, we've had this SCAI WIN. It stands for Women in Innovations. And it's a committee that we formed specifically to mentor and foster the professional development of women and to enhance research by women or research about women. And that has been very, very successful. We've managed to put lots of women at the podium. We've had specific conferences just so they can enhance their speaking skills and get exposure to the rest of the world, basically. We also implemented this thing just this year. It's a specific mentorship program. And if you're a female, regardless of where you are in training, you could be a medical student, you could be a resident, or you can even be a practicing cardiologist. You may not have anybody who's your same sex or anybody who has ever helped you throughout your career. And you're able to connect with some people in our WIN committee to, bounce ideas or actually have a more formal mentoring process. When I became president, I specifically decided that we were going to try to increase the diversity. And so as part of that, we changed our scientific sessions program. So now we require that at least a minimum of 15% of all lectures are given by women or underserved minorities. And in the past, there had been none of that. We also developed this Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. And we also commissioned two publications, which hopefully will be published this month. One was on revascularization in women, and that was just a really great a manuscript that was written by Alexandra Lansky. And the other one was racial and ethnic disparities. And we covered, what we did is we got all four of our clinical councils. We covered coronary disease, peripheral vascular disease, structural heart disease, as well as congenital heart disease. And we compiled the available literature. And interestingly enough, there, as you might suspect, there does appear to be lots of disparities, as well as some genetic differences that might account for some of this. But we compiled this into a publication and came up with marching orders as to how we hope to improve this in the future. So that has been a big focus of my year as president.
Right. For many women investigators, navigating research networks can be a challenge. Many research networks are closed, and output often relies on the investigator as a first or last author when you're not part of a wider network. What is your advice to young investigators, particularly women investigators, persons of color who may be left out of informal networks, both at their research institute and on a wider scale by virtue of perhaps a focus on the competing demands of early parenthood or navigating tough environments in their locales? What can you offer them to increase their ability to network, navigate exclusions, and integrate themselves into a wider, productive network?
I think you should start at your own institution. I see lots of publications coming out from databases such as linked databases with Medicare, um, you know, the administrative billing databases, the national inpatient sample. And so even if you don't have a network, if you have access to that, you can write a paper and then actually even inquire some of the leaders to help you with that paper, because I get those requests not infrequently. With regard to trying to develop more of a network, if you're a clinical physician, I would recommend having participating in clinical research. In the past, prior to the pandemic, there would be at least one investigator meeting per year, and you can get a chance to talk to people. Even if you don't attend that meeting, there's lots of Zoom conferences where you can interact. And if you're a good recruiter or you come up with some interesting ideas for sub studies, often that's the way to, you know, basically get into the club. Um, and I think with regard to the difficulties with childbearing, that's I mean, we could spend days talking about that, you know, because I've consulted or talked to many of my trainees about this. There is no good time to have a child, period. And, you know, if you think about it, you just should do it. It's going to be difficult no matter what stage of your career. And even if you were just a stay at home mom, it's still difficult. It's the most difficult job I did, much more challenging than being a physician, but it's incredibly rewarding. And you just have to get the right support system in place. You know, I hired a lot of babysitters and daytime nannies, and then you have your spouse and family to help if possible. But you can certainly do it. And the one travesty that I see are women who think that they have to choose their career versus a social life. And I think all of us need a partner, and you may or may not want to have children, but you need something other than your career because your career does not love you.
Right. And my little daughter, when she was 7, she's now 13, I have 2 kids, um, reminded me about the paradox of how much we invest in our careers. And that the more we invest in our careers, the less time we sometimes have to do those simple things that bring us joy, like time spent with family, for example. So, certainly, it's a juggling act, one that is facilitated with supports at home and perhaps in the wider community. I've learned to rely on carpools a lot. But perhaps for many women, not the biggest challenge in their career. I've certainly found that it's very feasible to juggle parenting with a research and clinical career, and that some of the barriers that are more substantive are those in our work environment. So onward and forward we go, trying to navigate those barriers for ourselves, and then also create some changes in the system for those that come behind us so that the journey gets incrementally easier. I would like to thank you so much for spending your time with us this morning. It was my absolute honor to meet you. This was just a big excuse to get to meet Dr. Grines for me. But we're honored, and we know that our viewers will benefit from your experience and your advice. Thank you so much,
Oh,
Dr. Grines.
thank you so much for asking me.